Well, hello and welcome back. We are continuing our MySQL database, MySQL MariaDB SQL tutorial stuff. And we're going to continue talking about tables today. So if we go ahead and jump into, I should probably get out to my machine. And then let's do, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to jump into our database, tutor-p, and we are going to use our tutorial database. Yep. If you remember last time, we had two tables. We had a table 1 and parent. Table 1 is sort of like an address, and the parent is like a user. And so what I want to do this time is I'm going to take a couple records and insert them into the parent table. Because what I'm going to do here is we're going to play around a little bit with the inner and outer joins. Now what we have here is some data. Let's do this from tutorial parent. I want to show you the data real quick that we have first. So that's what we have in parent, and in one we've got, so what we have for, we'll call them users, we've got 4 users and we've got 3 addresses. And if you remember from foreign key relationships, we have in the parent table, we have this T1 ID, which ties it back to a record in the tutorial 1 table. And so we have 2 of the records here are tied to record 3. 1 isn't tied to anything, and 1 of them is tied to record 1. Now, if we go back to, I'm going to steal my query here that we used from last time. And this query, we're selecting from the parent, the username, email, login, and then from the address or the tutorial 1 table, address, name, city, state, zip. And as we can see here, although we have, and we did a select, we didn't have anything else, any where clause or anything. So theoretically, it should take, because it did from tutorial parent, it should give us all the records back in tutorial parent. However, it doesn't, because we have this inner join that says I'm only going to take back rows where my T1 ID exists somewhere in the other T1 ID. And so that's where we get the results here, where we don't see username 3, because they're not tied to anybody. But we also do see here where username 1 and 2 have the same address. We can see here they're both tied to address 2, and then the other guy's tied to address 4. Now that is an inner join, but if we just do an outer join, or more specifically a left join, and change that keyword inner to left, that's the only thing I'm going to change. Now we're going to see all of them, because what this says is it says, go ahead and give me the data from, where does the left join? Give me the data from tutorial 1. Let me see if I expand that out. It'll be a little bit, yeah. So give me the data from tutorial 1, but only if I can connect to it. What it does otherwise is it sends us nulls. So we can see here for user 3, where what we have is a user that's tied to no address, is guess what? It doesn't show us an address. It just shows us nulls from this address, name, city, state, and zip. And all of those fields came out of the tutorial 1. Now I do want to, before we move on, I want to do it's an old school way to do joins. And I'm going to show you just because you may run into it. But this approach of specifically doing like inner or left joins is a much better way to do it. And the way that looks, I can't blow that up enough probably. So what I'm going to do instead, I'm going to take the inner join and then we'll show it. I'll show it to you in a second here. is instead I'm going to take the same selects, but I can say here where I said from tutorial parent as TP, then I can do a comma and give it the second table, which is going to be tutorial 1, or as many tables as I want. And then instead of this whole inner join, then I'm going to say where TP1 equal, or TP1 ID equals T1 1 ID. And I'll do this here so it's a little bigger to see. And so here we go. So we have the same fields. What we do is instead of seeing multiple, basically you can think of it as like a line per table that we're joining, we see all of these. Here we go from our here's our two tables. And then we just have a where clause. So it's just select stuff from a list of tables and then a where clause. The problem is that if we do the same thing and we don't include a where clause, we get every possible combination. You get a cross join where it basically says for every row in the first table, which is tutorial parent, parrot with a, as in P, not parrot as in the bird, but PAIR, the record, with a record in tutorial 1. So you can see here, user 1 exists 3 times, 1 for each record that's in tutorial 1. And so you can see here where he has name 2, 3, and 4 for user 1. And then here you see the same thing repeated for 2. And so you end up with these things that are really not what you wanted. And as you can see here, can be huge. I mean, this was just 3 records by 4 records. Let's say you do that with 2 tables that have 10,000 records each. You have just suddenly created a huge query, huge result set, none of which is useful. Now, there are some things you can do to try to simplify that out a little bit, but that would be after the fact. And I think that's part of why we've moved to this this use of inner joins and inner left outer joins. Using those is that now it's much easier to see what the you give it like a primary table and it starts there. And then it's going to start whittling away before it even leaves, before that data even leaves the server, which makes it easier to tune. And you're going to find that your queries are dramatically different in speed. If I were to take this same query, and I could, if I do this query with the where, that one that did work, you know, that one only gave me the 3. But if I use that along with the one that was the inner join, where was the inner join? That's left joint here. If I do that same one, so you can see here, these are the identical result sets. And for all, these are identical queries, I guess, as far as like, this is what I'm asking, but how I ask it is different. And in a lot of cases, a lot of modern databases, you will find that using the inner join approach like this is going to be substantially faster. I have seen a pretty nice percentage as far as like up to like 70 and 80% better running queries, and maybe even more than that, doing it with this inner join as opposed to doing like the multiple table listing. And it helps with, we'll get into the idea of indexes and stuff like that. But this is going to be just showing you this so that you can see it, but you want to use this inner join approach. So now let's go back over here. Now let's go ahead and I'm going to create a new table. This third table I'm going to create, I'm going to call it lookup type or LKP type. And what you can see here is all it is it's a type ID. It's a 100 character, up to 100 character name. I'm going to default it to undefined. I'm going to have a code that's a varchar 4, and then its primary key is type ID. And so now I'm going to, because I cheated a little bit earlier, I have somewhere in here some SQL to create a few rows. So I'm going to create those rows. And whatever I didn't do right. So let's go back to this. It's called lookup type. Oh, it's not insert into table. That's what happens when you don't pre-run your stuff. But that's okay. At least I'm saving us a little bit of time. And okay, and then if I do select star from lookup type, then I'm going to see the 3 records I created with their IDs. So now I've got this idea of a home address, a mailing address, and a business address. And what I'm going to do is I am going to go into tutorial 1 table where we see our addresses, and I'm going to add a type, a type field, because we're going to get a little more complicated here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a column. So I'm adding a column called type ID to tutorial 1, and it's going to show up after zip. So now if I do describe tutorial 1, I'm going to see that I have now this type ID, and by default it's null. And if I do this, select star from tutorial 1, then I'm going to see that I have the type ID of null everywhere. Now let's just make it simple, and I'm going to update. Well, let's do it this way first. Now what I'm going to do is, if you can remember, we used a reference in the past. We used a foreign key reference. We used this constraint in order to tie a address, essentially what an address is, back to a person. And so we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use an alter. So what we can do is we can alter the table, and I'll show you here, is, oops, I have a typo in there anyways. So I'm going to come in like we saw before. I'm going to do alter table. I'm going to give it a table name. So this is going to be that tutorial 1 table. And now I'm going to add a constraint. Before we added a column. I'm going to give it the constraint name, what type is it, and then basically, you know, what key or what column, which would be type ID, am I using in tutorial 1, and then what am I tying it off to? I'm going to tie it to lookup type ID. Did I get it? There we go. And so now, going back to my type IDs, if I wanted to update tutorial 1, and I want to set the type ID equal to 4. Let's do that, because look, we'll note that there is no 4, so it should complain, as you remember, because that foreign key is going to kick off here in a second. And sure enough, foreign key constraint fails. The type FK, and that's the name of that's my foreign key, and it does because I can't find number 4 in there. But if I change it over to 3, then boom, I've got it. And if I go select star from tutorial 1, now everybody's type is going to be type 3, which is a business address. So now we've got 3 tables. And so that's where I want to go next, is I'm going to take our earlier one. Ooh, let's do this. Get my notes changed a little bit. And I will show you this a little better in a bigger font. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually do 2 inner joins. I'm going to inner join the table lookup type, and I'll call him LT. And I'm going to join that on LT dot type ID equals, he is in tutorial 1, which is T1 type ID. And so now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to take, after all of this, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to do an LT dot, we'll do dot code for now. And so if we take that and we jump over in our database, so no, I haven't changed too much, is I'm saying I'm going to add another table that I'm going to link data to, and I'm only going to show just one additional field. And so doing that, now I see that I have my, where is it? I have my tutorial parent data. Now I can see my tutorial child data, and now I can see my lookup type. And I could change that, so I could call it instead of, let's do it this way. It's going to be easier to edit it here. So let's say instead of code, I say name. And I can make either of these a left join. So I can come in here and do a left join. And I can do this and make this a left join. We'll make both of them. And then you're going to see that it'll be able to flow through. And I see nulls across the board here. Now, if I were to do an inner join on this first one, the inner join back to the address, then this row would disappear because it would say I have to have an address. But now, if I do an inner join here, but leave a left join for the type, leave a left join and then do an inner join on the type, then I'm also going to lose it. We'll see here. Because even though I did a left join for the address, I said, hey, give me nulls. If you find nulls, that's fine. But I came back with the inner join and said, I have to have a matching name. And so now I'm stuck because it says, hey, I'm looking up the code. You gave me a null. I can't find the null code anywhere, so that's not going to work. And so you can, mix and match your inner joins and left joins, but realize that once you do one that's inner, you're going to restrict some of the data that comes back. So it can be a little bit complicated, and that's why I wanted to get us to at least 3 tables. Now, if we want to take our earlier example, I'll show you how it gets really complicated quick. If we do our one with the commas, that's the inner join. Where did I put that? Nope, not that one. Let's create table. It's another. Here we go. So let's take our earlier one where we did the comma version. So we do a select from table 1, comma table 2, comma table 3, look up type, LT. Now, if we want to do the inner join, we're going to say where the T1 IDs match and LT dot code ID or type ID equals, was that T1 dot type ID. And so you end up having these really huge where clauses. Yep, there we go. And so I just pasted that in. And you have these really huge where clauses, but I do get the right data. It's just now, which is basically a processing thing, is now it's basically pulling everything and then it's going to start pulling it out, as opposed to while it's pulling data, limiting what it's pulling even in the first, essentially like the first pass. Now, I think that's a good spot for us to stop on this one. We've added a third table. We've got some additional data, and we're cruising along, learning a little bit more about our selects. We've touched on some updates and things like that. And so now we're going to we'll continue moving on the next episode. That being said, we'll wrap this one up. So go out there and have yourself a great day, a great week, and we will talk to you next time.